Thank you, Kelly. I'm going to try to, I'm going to have to go from some cheat sheets up here because the font on this, on my screen is very small. But I think you guys have the advantage over me on this. But anyway, this is kind of a, we talk about excellence, and this is the third year that the district has achieved excellence. This is the first time in the 3 years that I've been with the school district that I've presented the state of the schools, and our costs have actually gone down versus the state average. Now, cost per pupil, what does that mean? That's the cost basically to educate a student at Talawanda versus that of the state average. Right now, we are at just over $10,000 a year. The state average is $10,253. Our cost per student actually dropped by just over $200 a student for a change of about 2% this year. So, in my mind, when you consider where costs have been growing throughout the state, certainly in the public sector, I think this is a commendable performance for the school district. And in a few minutes, as I go through some other slides, I'm going to explain how we got there. This next slide really describes not only our change this year versus 2008, but where we trend over the last 3 years. Now, one thing to note about this cost per pupil data, the state of Ohio usually runs about 15 months behind schedule. So what I'm presenting tonight is 2009 data. We've already closed 2010 and we're now in 2011. But our financial statements for 2010 have not yet been audited, and all the data has not yet been uploaded to the state website. So when you talk about cost data in education, it always trends about 15 to 18 months behind where you currently are. The good news on this slide is when you compare our operating costs, again, cost per student, in 2009 versus 2008, we actually decreased our costs by 1.2%. You look at the top line, which is administrative cost, we're down year over year 2.6%, and we're only up 1.5% over the 3 years. Administrative cost is simply overhead. Basically, it's your overhead. It's Dr. Cagwin's, Kelly's, myself, and other administrators. That's our salaries and all the other costs that go into that line that don't necessarily directly affect the classroom. Our building costs dropped by 7.5% year over year. That's an incredible performance when you consider that we've got 4 older buildings. The only new building in those numbers would be Bogan, of course, which opened in 2006. And we have one of the biggest bus routes, among the biggest bus routes in the state of Ohio. As I've said many times before, our buses travel the equivalent of New York to California every day. We spend just under $300,000 a year on diesel fuel. So to deliver a performance that we're actually 8%, roughly speaking, versus the prior year, I think is a pretty good performance. And again, our trend over the last 3 years, we're down 5.4% in that category. We grew instruction. Instruction is the cornerstone of what we do. It's the sweet spot, as I like to say. It's education. It's what goes on in the classroom. We grew that expense by 1.9% and 3.9% over the 3 years. And again, you can kind of read the rest of the numbers. But again, one thing to keep in mind also when you look at these numbers, a 1.7% increase over 3 years. Inflation, also known as consumer price index, the average was 2.3%. So we operated during those 3 years below inflation. How'd the state do? Not as well as Talawanda. When you look at the cost per pupil across the state, 2008 versus 2009, it increased by 2.6%. Over the 3 years, it increased by 6.5%. So I'm going to rack it up and show how we compare to the state here in a minute, but that's the secret to success. That's how we were able to lower our operating costs versus the state when you look at 2009 versus 2008. Now let's look at the 3-year change, Talawanda versus the state of Ohio. As I said before, Talawanda our expenses increased over 3 years by 1.7%. Our administrative or overhead only increased by 1.5%. Again, keep in mind, inflation is 2.3%. Our building operation cost, again, the cost to operate the building, the cafeterias, busing dropped by 5.4%. During that same time period, state increased by 7.6%. Instruction grew by almost 4%. At the state level, it grew by 6%. Pupil support by 6.9%, the state by 6.6%. The key here is the district invested in those things that are the cornerstone of what we do. That's the classroom through education, or through instruction, and pupil support, which again are those services that are directly related to the education of the student, but those are services that are provided outside the classroom. Percent to total. Where is the tax dollars spent? So when you look at that $10,000 that it costs to educate a student in Talawanda, 10.8% of that is administrative costs, otherwise known as overhead, compared to 11.7%, or almost 12% for the state of Ohio. Again, all schools, all 614 public schools across the state of Ohio. So we're under the state average. Our building operations is now at 19.5%, which ties with, again, the state average of 19.5%. Again, a function of us bringing our operating costs down, just over 5% in 2008 versus 2009. Instruction, we're pretty much 55%. The state's at 55%. Pupil support, we're actually higher than the state, but again, this is a decision that the district has made. Has decided to invest in these things that are going to get a payback, obviously, in terms of driving the excellence, in terms of the report card. And then you can see how the rest of it rounds out. How did we achieve some of these savings? Well, I'm not going to go through. I've got a spreadsheet here that I'll be willing to share with anyone that has an interest after this meeting. But basically, since 2008, we've identified almost $2.6 million worth of savings in the school district. And I've just captured some of the big pieces of it. About 61% of it has been payroll costs. When you look at our expense structure, almost 80% of our expenditures in the school district are payroll and benefits. I'm going to talk a little bit about benefits in a minute. And then we had savings in workers' comp, utility savings, facility savings, and then contracts and other services. That's just kind of the catch-all. The $2.6 million that we've saved over the last three and a half years. That's the good news. When you look at our revenue projections, as I mentioned, the numbers that I just shared with you are 2009. 2010, those numbers have not been audited and have not been shared with the state, but I would hope that we continue to see a decline in our operating expenses in terms of cost per pupil versus the state average, and would hope that would then carry us into where we are now with 2011, the financial forecast. Probably this is one of those things where a picture is worth 1,000 words. I'm not going to go into the forecast. The forecast is something that I have to file with the state by Friday. I'm going to present it to the board at the November board meeting, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. But if you look at where we're trending as a school district, the bar chart on the far right basically shows in 2011, I'm projecting we'll have a slight operating surplus. Beginning in 12 and all the way through 2015, the way the numbers are falling out is we're going to start into what is called a operating shortfall or deficit. That's really the confluence of a couple of things. Our revenue is dropping. It's actually flattened out. Over the next 4 years, I expect the state to cut our state aid by almost 35%, or about $2.3 million. We're also, like other employers, are experiencing a tremendous increase in our healthcare costs. Our costs are projected from 2012 through 2015 to grow at a rate of about 14%. That's about $1.8 million. So with your revenues are flattening out and your operating costs are not flattening out along the same line, then we're going to start to experience potentially some some operating deficits. And then the graph here on the left-hand side just shows our cash balance where we're starting today at just over 16 million. And then you see the effect of those operating deficits as it draws down our cash balance. So the good news is we had a great 2009 when you compare to 2008. I expect that good news to continue in 2010 when we finally see those set of numbers. And Kelly, myself, and Phil are busy working on the forecast and then making some decisions and trying to look for the kinds of things we can do to affect those bar charts and ultimately the numbers as we finalize the forecast. So.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Okay, in conclusion, our students' performance is strong and ever increasing. Our teachers are working hard to prepare our students for success after graduation. And we are determined to operate our district in a sound fiscal manner while providing our children and our community excellent facilities for learning. This concludes our State of the Schools address, and at this time, Dr. Cagwin, Mike Davis, and I will take any questions you may have.